Here's your host, John, with more classic movie reviews.
Welcome to today's show. My name is John. As always, you can subscribe to the show on iTunes or follow the links to social media in the podcast show notes. You can also go to snarkymoviereviews.com to read notes, bios, and other random movie thoughts. Remember, this show is completely free and independent. All I ask is that you jump over to iTunes and give me a review. Today's movie is Double Indemnity, 1944. This movie is almost always on the list of the top 5 film noirs of all time. The story is told in narrative, so you can see how the main characters came to be in the circumstances that they are in. The femme fatale for this film is one of the darkest of all. The angles, lighting, and smoking is first rate. This is the best example of high pants, fast-talking 1940s-50s filmmaking.
And now back to 1943's fast-talking high trousers.
Well, isn't this a fine song and dance?
What are you getting so hot about?
Keep your shirt on.
Where do you get off making remarks like that?
Supposing I say you're a lunkhead.
Well, I ain't much for supposing.
Well, supposing you were.
Well, maybe I'm through supposing and I'm fixed to start figuring.
Horseradish.
Well, aren't you a pocket full of firecrackers?
Oh, yeah? You got something to say about it?
I'll say plenty.
While this is not my favorite film noir, reserving the number 1 spot for something with Humphrey Bogart in it, and which will be reviewed as episode 100, Double Indemnity, 1944, is clearly in my top 5. I don't care for Walter Neff as much as I care for Frank Bigelow in episode 48, DOA 1950, an innocent man fighting for his life. I think that Kathy was a more nuanced femme fatale in episode 54, Out of the Past 1947. And on sheer coolness, Humphrey Bogart was the penultimate man in the Maltese Falcon 1941. So with all that said, let's move on to the actors, several of whom we have previously covered.
The actors.
Barbara Stanwyck played the role of femme fatale Phyllis Dietrichson. Stanwyck was covered in episode 35, The Violent Men, 1955. Edward G. Robinson played Barton Keyes, a tough insurance investigator. Robinson was covered in episode 35, The Violent Men, 1955. Porter Hall was cast as Mr. Jackson. Hall was first covered in episode 89, Ace in the Hole, 1959. Fred MacMurray played the role of hapless insurance salesman Walter Neff. MacMurray may be the most underrated actor of his generation. MacMurray was born in Illinois, and his paternal aunt was in vaudeville. At the age of 5, his family moved to Beaver Dam, Wisconsin. MacMurray was a good athlete in multiple sports. He attended Carroll College with plans to be a musician. MacMurray had a fairly successful musical career before going on Broadway in 1930. As a result of his stage work, he was given a 7-year contract with Paramount. Through the 1930s, MacMurray spent time steadily gaining larger roles as he learned his craft. In the 1940s, his career took off with movies such as Above Suspicion, 1943, the musical Where Do We Go From Here, 1945, and The Egg and I, 1947. This last movie launched the Ma and Paul Kettle series of films. Of course, this great actor will always be remembered for 2 bad guy roles. They are, of course, the Walter Neff character in Double Indemnity, 1944, and the scheming Lieutenant Kiefer in The Caine Mutiny, 1954. He was such a stinker in The Caine Mutiny, 1954, that I always cheer at the ending. The mid-1950s found MacMurray playing mostly westerns. His acting career perked back up when he got a job from his old friend Walt Disney in The Shaggy Dog, 1959. He played an amoral adulterer in The Apartment, 1960, with Jack Lemmon and Shirley MacLaine before returning to Disney Studios. Some of his films included The Absent-Minded Professor, 1961, the sequel Son of Flubber, 1963, with Nancy Olson playing his girlfriend in both. One of my favorites is Follow Me Boys, 1966, where he plays a scoutmaster to a young Kurt Russell. Beginning in 1960, MacMurray was also in television with My 3 Sons, a show that lasted from 1960 to 1972. He finally retired in 1978 and passed away in 1991.
Story.
This movie begins at night with a car speeding across town and running through signals. The man gets out wearing an overcoat and holding his side. When he raps on the door of an office building, the elevator operator lets him inside. The operator talks to Walter Neff, Fred MacMurray, but he gets short replies. They stop on the 12th floor at the office of Pacific All Risk Insurance. Neff makes his way to his office, lights a cigarette, and loads a new wax roll into his dictaphone. He begins by confessing to his boss, Barton Keyes, Edward G. Robinson. He says he murdered Mr. Dietrichson and begins to tell his story. Walter Neff was out driving, and he stops by the Dietrichson house to get signatures on car insurance policies. How long has it been since this happened? When Neff forces his way past the maid, Phyllis Dietrichson, Barbara Stanwyck, comes to the top of the stairs wearing only a towel, as she has been outside nude sunbathing. She returns in a bit, still buttoning her blouse. They film an ankle bracelet she is wearing and later make a big deal about it. Phyllis and Walter start talking about insurance, but she asks about an insurance policy for accidental death. The pair slip into a little light flirtation, which ends up with snappy one-liners being shot back and forth.
Mr. Neff, why don't you drop by tomorrow evening around 8:30? He'll be in then.
Who?
My husband. You were anxious to talk to him, weren't you?
Yeah, I was, but I'm sort of getting over the idea, if you know what I mean.
There's a speed limit in this state, Mr. Neff. 45 miles an hour.
How fast was I going, officer?
I'd say around 90.
Suppose you get down off your motorcycle and give me a ticket.
Suppose I let you off with a warning this time.
Suppose it doesn't take.
Suppose I have to whack you over the knuckles.
Suppose I bust out crying and put my head on your shoulder.
Suppose you try putting it on my husband's shoulder.
That tears it.
A mention of her husband shocks Neff back to this world. As Neff drives away, he smells honeysuckle and is on a cloud. He comments that tough claims inspector Barton Keyes would have caught her game right away. Back at the office, Neff is called into Keyes' office. Keyes is grilling a man about a claim for a truck that burned. As Neff watches, the truck owner breaks under Keyes' pressure and signs away his rights to a claim. Keyes belly aches about the company taking too many risks by signing shaky customers.
What kind of an outfit is this, anyway? Are we an insurance company or just a bunch of dim-witted amateurs to write a policy on a mug like that?
Now, wait a minute, Keys. I don't rate this beef. I clipped a note of that Golopus application to have him thoroughly investigated before we accepted the risk.
I know you did, Walter. I'm not beating at you. It's the companies, the way they do things. The way they don't do things. The way they'll write anything just to get it down on the sales sheet. And I'm the guy that has to sit here up to my neck and phony claims so they won't throw more money out the window than they take in at the door.
Okay, turn the record over. Let's hear the other side.
Well, I get darn sick of trying to pick up after a gang of fast-talking salesmen dumb enough to sell life insurance to a guy who sleeps in the same bed with 4 rattlesnakes.
As Neff leaves, he reflects on how much he loves and respects Keyes. When Neff gets back to his office, there is a note from Phyllis asking him to come to her house at 3:30 when her husband is not at home. He thinks about her anklet and clears all of his appointments for that day. When he gets there, she says she thought that her husband would be there and forgot it was the maid's day off. They settle down on the couch and she asks if she can get accident insurance without her husband knowing it. Neff sees that she wants to kill her husband and bugs out. She continues to play innocent. Neff takes the rest of the day off to drink beer and bowl a few frames. He spends the whole day trying to get Phyllis out of his head, but by nightfall he realizes that she is too hot to resist. At 8 o'clock the doorbell rings and he already knows who it is. She's still pretending to be innocent, but Neff is all in. After being coy for a bit, they get all kissy-face.
Maybe I oughtn't to have come.
Maybe you oughtn't.
You want me to go?
If you want to.
Right now?
Sure, right now.
Neff starts talking about how hard it is to get away with murder and insurance fraud. She talks about her stepdaughter, Lola, Jean Heather, and says she was the nurse for her husband's first wife before she died. She says she is abused, and Neff confirms that she wants to kill her husband after she gets the policy. The timeline jumps back to Neff recording, and he says that he has been thinking about robbing the company for some time. The story then pops back to Neff's bedroom, where Phyllis is pouring on some extra Victim before she leaves. Neff tells her that they will do it, and do it perfect. A couple of nights later, Neff goes to the house to trick Mr. Dietrichson, Tom Powers, into signing a policy without knowing it. They also bring in Lola as a witness to the sales pitch. Lola gets ready to go out, and her parents remind her not to see Nino Zacchetti, Brian Barr. Neff gets the signature and finds out the husband is traveling to Palo Alto. Outside, Neff tells Phyllis that if they can get him to die on a train, they will get the double indemnity payoff at twice the amount. When Neff gets to his car, Lola is waiting inside. She just wants a ride. Lola plays the victim too and says she is meeting Nino. Neff meets Nino, and Nino is pretty hostile. Neff feels really bad about planning to kill Lola's father. Neff and Phyllis have stopped phone calling each other. They meet at a local supermarket to discuss the plans for the murder. Neff finds out that Mr. Dietrichson broke his leg and has canceled the trip. Phyllis says she is missing Neff, but her face tells another story. About a week after the couple's last meetings, Keyes comes into Neff's office and offers him a job as an investigator. Keyes gives him the greatest job offer ever. Neff gets a call from Phyllis while Keyes is in his office. She says her husband is leaving on the train that night and the murder is on. Neff starts laying a trail that can be followed for an alibi. He dresses in the same color suit as Mr. Dietrichson and walks to the house. He gets into the back seat of the car and hides. Phyllis pulls the car forward and her husband gets in with his broken leg. Phyllis drives to a dark street and honks the horn 3 times. On the signal, Neff rises up and kills her husband. At the train station, Neff, now wearing a cast, gets on the train. Phyllis drives ahead with the body. When Neff makes it to the back of the train, there is another passenger, Mr. Jackson, Porter Hall, messing up his plans. Neff tricks Jackson into going for his cigarettes, and he jumps off the train. Phyllis is at the jump spot. They take her husband's body and throw it on the tracks. They have a brief moment of terror when the car won't start, but they get it going. Phyllis has ice water in her veins. A couple of days later, Keyes starts to investigate the case. Keyes and Neff get called into the boss's office. He starts going over the details of the case. Phyllis comes into the boss's office. The boss announces that he thinks it's a suicide. Phyllis becomes enraged when the boss offers her a settlement for less than the face value. After Phyllis leaves, Keyes gives the boss the rundown on the statistics.
You know, you ought to take a look at the statistics on suicide sometime. You might learn a little something about the insurance business.
Mr. Keyes, I was raised in the insurance business.
Yeah, in the front office. Come now, you've never read an actuarial table in your life, have you? Why, they've got 10 volumes on suicide alone. Suicide by race, by color, by occupation, by sex, by seasons of the year, by time of day. Suicide, how committed? By poisons, by firearms, by drowning, by leaks. Suicide by poison, subdivided by types of poison, such as corrosive, irritant, systemic, gaseous, narcotic, alkaloid, protein, and so forth. Suicide by leaps, subdivided by leaps from high places, under the wheels of trains, under the wheels of trucks, under the feet of horses, from steamboats. But Mr. Norton, of all the cases on record, there's not one single case of suicide by leap from the rear end of a moving train.
Keyes says there is not one case of suicide by jumping from the back of the train. It couldn't be any better for Neff and Phyllis. That night, Phyllis calls Neff and says she is coming to see him. After they hang up, Keyes shows up at the door. Keyes has realized that there should have been a claim put in for the broken leg. Now, this is way before you could call somebody on the cell phone and tell them not to show up. Phyllis hears the 2 men talking and waits at the door. When Keyes leaves, she hides behind the open door. She pushes the door so Neff knows she is there. Keyes talks about convicting her as the pair try to stay calm. Later in the apartment, she plays Neff like a cheap fiddle. Lola shows up at Neff's office and tries to convince him that Phyllis is behind her father's death. She tells him that she believes Phyllis was behind her mother's death as well. Neff is feeling really guilty about Lola losing both parents. Lola says she has moved out and broken up with Nino. Neff takes her out to dinner that night and sees her again the next day. On Monday, Neff gets called into Keyes' office, and outside is Jackson from the back of the train. Keyes has figured out that Mr. Dietrichson was never on the train. He now knows it was Phyllis and someone else that did the killing. Jackson says that Mr. Dietrichson was never on the train and the man he saw was much younger.
Huh? There it is, Walter. It's beginning to come apart at the seams already. Murder's never perfect. Always comes apart sooner or later. And when 2 people are involved, it's usually sooner. Now, we know the Dietrichson dame is in it, and somebody else. Pretty soon we'll know who that somebody else is. He'll show he's got to show. Sometime, somewhere, they've got to meet. Their emotions are all kicked up. Whether it's love or hate doesn't matter. They can't keep away from each other. They may think it's twice as safe because there are 2 of them. But it isn't twice as safe. It's 10 times twice as dangerous. They've committed a murder. And it's not like taking a trolley ride together where they can get off at different stops. They're stuck with each other, and they've got to ride all the way to the end of the line, and it's a one-way trip, and the last stop is the cemetery.
Neff calls Phyllis from the market, and they meet there. Phyllis is rocking some hip sunglasses in the market. He tells her about the claim being denied and that the murder of Lola's mother will come out. Phyllis gets mad that Neff is seeing Lola. Neff goes out with Lola some more. One night behind the Hollywood Bowl, Lola tells Neff that Phyllis is seeing Nino, and they killed her father together. The next day, Keyes tells Neff that they have a line on who the other murderer is. Neff sneaks into Keyes' office. He finds a dictaphone roll that says Neff is not a suspect, and Nino definitely is the suspect. Neff calls Phyllis and sets up a meeting for 11 p.m. Neff is planning on murdering Phyllis. Back at her house, Phyllis puts a gun under the cushion of her chair. Neff reveals that he is going to lay the murder off on her and Nino. He basically tells her he is going to kill her. Phyllis spins a tale that she was only using Nino to kill Lola. As Neff closes the window so he can murder Phyllis, she shoots him in the shoulder. Neff walks over to Phyllis and takes the gun. She then says she knew that it was love because she couldn't fire the second shot.
Why didn't you shoot again, baby? Don't tell me it's because you've been in love with me all this time.
No, I never loved you, Walter, not you or anybody else. I'm rotten to the heart. I used you just as you said. That's all you ever meant to me. Until a minute ago, when I couldn't fire that second shot. I never thought that could happen to me.
Sorry, baby, I'm not buying.
I'm not asking you to buy. Just hold me close.
Goodbye, baby.
She hugs him, and he fires 2 shots into her belly. Outside, Neff runs into Nino and convinces him not to go into the house and that Lola really loves him. Neff gives him a nickel and tells him to call Lola. Back at the office on the dictaphone, Neff continues his confession. Neff looks over his shoulder and Keyes is there listening to the confession. Keyes tries to call a doctor, but Neff says he is going to Mexico and not the gas chamber. Neff hits the ground from blood loss before he gets to the elevator. Keyes calls the ambulance and the police. Neff tells Keyes he couldn't figure the case out because the guy was too close, right across the desk. Keyes says, closer than that, and Neff says, I love you too. The film code at the time wouldn't allow someone to be seen as getting away with a crime. For this reason, director Wilder had to shoot another ending, with Neff walking to the gas chamber. This part of the film has been lost, but it would have been terrible.
Here's the world-famous short summary.
Couple takes a trolley ride. If you enjoyed this week's show, please tell your friends, and if you really want to help, drop over to iTunes to give me a review. If you want to comment, recommend a movie, or just say hi, follow the links in the show notes to my site. Beware the Moors.
Let's be frank. You never wanted to give me a review on iTunes. You come to me this day, on the day of my daughter's wedding, and you ask me, give me a movie review. But you never come to my house in friendship. You never wanted to drink coffee with me. Had you gone to iTunes and given me a review, this day I would give you a movie review.